The research station orbited a dead planet called Corvath Prime, and nobody expected anything interesting to happen there anymore. But they were all wrong about that because something very interesting was about to happen, and it would change everything. For three alien sisters who thought their lives were over, Captain Amy Rodriguez was bored out of her mind as she piloted her survey ship around the abandoned station, and her job was to check if the old facility could be salvaged for parts or materials. But she did not expect to find anyone alive because the station had been evacuated 5 years ago, when the mining operations shut down. The station looked like a ghost town floating in space with broken windows and twisted metal and debris floating everywhere around it, and Amy guided her ship carefully through the wreckage field while her scanner swept for anything valuable. But then something strange showed up on her screen. There were life signs coming from deep inside the station in a section that should have been completely sealed off, and the reading showed 3 large beings and 3 smaller ones all grouped together in what looked like an old storage bay. And Amy sat up straight in her chair because this did not make sense at all. She tried to contact whoever was down there using every frequency her communication system had, but got no response except static, and she knew she should probably call for backup or report this to the authorities. But those life signs were getting weaker by the minute, and if she waited for help, they might all be dead. Amy made her decision quickly, like she always did when someone needed help, and she maneuvered her ship to dock with the damaged station and grabbed her emergency kit and put on her environment suit and headed into the dark corridors with just her flashlight to guide the way. The inside of the station was a mess with cables hanging from the ceiling and water dripping from burst pipes and strange fungus growing on the walls, and Amy had to climb over piles of debris and squeeze through collapsed doorways, and the whole time her suit sensors kept warning her about toxic air and radiation hazards. She followed her handheld scanner toward the life signs, and after 30 minutes of difficult navigation, she found the sealed door that led to the storage bay, and the door was locked from the outside with heavy magnetic bolts, and Amy wondered who had locked these people in and why. She used her plasma torch to cut through the locks, and it took 15 minutes of careful work, but finally the door hissed open and stale air rushed out smelling like metal and something sweet, and Amy shined her light into the darkness. 3 figures huddled in the corner, and they were not human, but they were beautiful in a strange alien way with long pointed ears and skin that seemed to shimmer with its own light. And they wore crystalline armor that looked like frozen waterfalls covering their bodies. Beside each of them was a small creature that looked like a miniature dragon with wings and scales that glowed in different colors, and one dragon was blue, another was red, and the third was green, and they were all curled protectively around the 3 alien women. The women looked up at Amy with large eyes that reflected her flashlight beam, and the eldest one tried to speak, but her voice was so weak that Amy could barely hear her, and she was saying something about being trapped and dying and needing help. Amy moved closer and activated her suit translator, and after a few seconds it started converting their language, and she could understand what they were saying, and what she heard made her angry. The 3 sisters were called Nyla, Tessa, and Quinn, and they were from a species called the Serath, who were known across the galaxy for their ability to bond with dragon companions, and they had been working on the research station when something terrible happened. A group of smugglers had attacked the station 5 years ago looking for valuable crystals, and the sisters had hidden in the storage bay with their dragons. But the smugglers found them, and instead of killing them outright, they locked them in and left them to die slowly. The smugglers had damaged the station's life support systems before they left, so nobody would come looking, and they assumed everyone would die within days. But the Serath sisters had survived much longer than expected because their crystalline armor could recycle air and extract moisture from the environment. But 5 years was too long even for their advanced armor, and now it was failing and breaking down, and Amy could see large cracks spreading across the crystalline surface, and wherever the armor was broken, the sisters' skin was exposed and turning gray. Nyla, the eldest, explained something that made Amy realize how serious this situation was, and she said that their armor was not just protection, but was bonded to their bodies at birth, and it regulated their biological functions, including their ability to reproduce. Without intact armor, the sisters would lose their fertility within hours, and since they were the last surviving members of their family bloodline, this meant their entire Genetic heritage would be lost forever, and Nyla started crying as she explained this. Tessa, the middle sister, was in the worst condition with armor broken across her back and chest, and she was barely conscious and breathing in short gasps, and her red dragon kept nuzzling her face, trying to keep her awake. Quinn, the youngest, looked at Amy with desperate hope and asked if the human could help them, and Amy saw such raw need in those alien eyes that she knew she could not refuse, even though she had no idea how to fix crystalline armor or save alien reproductive systems. Amy quickly assessed the situation, and the storage bay was running out of breathable air, and the temperature was dropping, and the sisters were too weak to walk on their own, and she needed to get them to her ship immediately. She called her ship and activated the emergency medical transport system, and within minutes a hover stretcher materialized in the storage bay, and Amy carefully loaded Nyla onto it first, because she seemed to be the most stable. The blue dragon named Sky chirped nervously and flew circles around Nyla as the stretcher lifted off and floated toward the door, and Amy sent it back to her ship, then called for another stretcher for Tessa loading. Tessa was harder because she cried out in pain every time Amy touched her, and the red dragon named Blaze snapped his teeth at Amy until Tessa whispered something to him, and he calmed down and let Amy work. The third stretcher came for Quinn, and the green dragon Leaf refused to leave his bonded partner and kept trying to curl up on top of her. So Amy just let him stay there and sent them both back to the ship together. Amy took one last look around the storage bay that had been a prison for 5 years, and she saw scratches on the walls where the sisters had counted days, and she saw dried tears on the floor, and she felt rage building in her chest at the smugglers who had done this. She sealed the bay door and made her way back through the ruined station to her ship, and by the time she got there, her medical AI had already started scanning the 3 sisters, and the report it gave her was not good. The armor failure was critical, and the sisters had maybe 4 hours before permanent damage occurred to their reproductive organs, and after that no medical technology in the galaxy could reverse it, and they would spend the rest of their lives knowing they were the end of their family. Amy looked at the 3 unconscious aliens on her medical tables, and she looked at the 3 small dragons huddled together in the corner of the bay, and she made a promise to herself that she would not let these beings lose their future. She had saved them from dying in that storage bay, but that was only the first step, and now she had to figure out how to repair alien armor that was bonded to their bodies and restore biological functions. She did not understand. Amy sat down at her computer terminal and started researching everything she could find about the Serath species and their crystalline armor and their dragon companions, and she knew time was running out, but humans were good at solving impossible problems. Her ship AI asked what course to set, and Amy told it to head for the nearest medical station at maximum speed, and then she got to work studying the armor fragments and trying to understand how they functioned. The 3 dragons watched her with intelligent eyes, and Amy had the feeling they understood, that she was trying to help. And the blue one, Sky, flew over and landed on her shoulder and chirped softly in what sounded like encouragement. Amy reached up and gently touched the small dragon and promised him that she would save his bonded partner and her sisters, and she would make sure their family line continued, and Sky nuzzled against her cheek as if sealing the promise. Outside the viewport, the stars streaked past as the ship raced toward help, and Amy worked frantically trying to understand alien biology and crystalline technology and dragon bonding, and she refused to give up because that was not what humans did. 4 hours was not much time, but it would have to be enough because Amy Rodriguez had never failed someone who needed her, and she was not about to start now, no matter how impossible the task seemed. Amy spent the first hour just trying to understand what she was dealing with, because the crystalline armor was unlike anything in human medical databases, and her ship AI kept giving her error messages, saying it could not classify the material, took samples from the broken pieces that had fallen off the sisters' bodies and put them under her medical scanner. And what she found amazed her, because the armor was alive in a way that made no sense according to human biology. The crystal had a cellular structure like living tissue, but it also had a molecular lattice like a mineral, and somehow these 2 impossible things existed together in the same material, and the AI calculated that this should not be physically possible. But Amy did not care about what should or should not be possible, because it clearly was possible since it was right there in front of her, and she needed to figure out how to fix it, not how to explain it. She studied the way the armor bonded to the sisters' skin and saw that tiny crystal filaments grew into their pores and connected directly to their nervous systems and circulatory systems, and even their endocrine systems. The armor was not just sitting on their skin like a suit, but was actually part of their bodies, and removing it would be like removing a vital organ. And Amy understood why the armor failure was so catastrophic. She checked on the sisters and found that Nyla was still stable, but Tessa was getting worse, and Quinn was somewhere in between, and the medical AI estimated they had 3 hours left before permanent damage occurred. Amy tried contacting the nearest medical station, but they were still 6 hours away, even at maximum speed, and when she explained the situation, the doctors there said they had no experience with Sereth biology and could not help. She tried contacting Sereth medical facilities, but the nearest one was in another sector weeks away, and they could send information but not actual help. And Amy realized she was on her own. The Sereth doctors sent her a data package with everything they knew about armor biology, and Amy downloaded it and started reading as fast as she could, and what she learned gave her an idea that might work. The armor could regenerate itself if given the right conditions and energy source, but it needed a catalyst to start the process, and normally that catalyst came from the dragons who were bonded to their Sereth partners. Dragons produced a unique bioenergy field that stimulated armor growth and repair, and baby Sereth received their first armor when their bonded dragon breathed on them during the bonding ceremony. Amy looked at the 3 small dragons and wondered if they could help repair the damaged armor on their partners. But the problem was that the damage was too extensive and the dragons were too young and weak from 5 years of captivity. She needed to amplify their power somehow and give them more energy to work with. And then she remembered something from her engineering training about resonance fields and energy multiplication. Her ship had a medical regeneration chamber that used electromagnetic fields to speed up tissue healing, and if she could modify it to work with the dragon's bioenergy, she might be able to amplify their natural armor repair abilities. Amy got to work immediately, and she pulled apart the regeneration chamber and recalibrated its field emitters and reprogrammed its frequency generators, and her hands moved with practiced skill even though she was exhausted. The 3 dragons watched her work with curious eyes, and Amy explained what she was trying to do, even though she did not know if they could understand her words. But they seemed to understand her intent. After 90 minutes of frantic work, Amy had the modified chamber ready, and she carefully placed Tessa inside because she was in the worst condition, and time was running out for her. Amy called Blaze the red dragon over and explained that she needed him to breathe his energy onto Tessa, just like he would during a bonding ceremony. And Blaze tilted his head and looked at his unconscious partner. The little dragon seemed to understand, and he flew into the chamber and landed on Tessa's chest and opened his mouth and breathed out a stream of red-orange light that looked like liquid fire. The regeneration chamber activated, and its modified fields caught the dragon's energy and amplified it and reflected it back, and suddenly the whole chamber was glowing with intense red light. Amy watched the monitors anxiously and saw that Tessa's armor was responding, and the cracks were starting to seal, and new crystal growth was spreading across the broken areas. But then something unexpected happened, and Tessa's body started convulsing and the medical alarms went off, and Amy saw that her brain activity was spiking dangerously high. She realized the problem immediately, and the amplified dragon energy was too intense, and it was overloading Tessa's nervous system because her body was too weak to handle that much power at once. Amy quickly adjusted the chamber settings and reduced the amplification by half, and Tessa's convulsions stopped, and her brain activity returned to normal levels, and the armor repair continued, but at a slower, safer rate. After 20 minutes in the chamber, Tessa's armor had regenerated enough to stabilize her biological functions, and Amy pulled her out and checked her vital signs and was relieved to see improvement. The medical AI confirmed that Tessa's reproductive system had been saved with minutes to spare, and the permanent damage had been prevented, and Amy felt a wave of relief wash over her. But she still had 2 more sisters to treat, and less than 2 hours remaining, and she needed to work faster while also being careful not to overload them, like she almost did with Tessa. She placed Nyla in the chamber next, and Sky the blue dragon performed the same energy-breathing ritual. And this time Amy had the Yor Amplification settings correct from the start, and the process went smoothly. Nyla's silver armor regenerated beautifully, and the cracks sealed with no complications, and after 15 minutes, she was stable, and Amy moved on to Quinn, the youngest. Sister Quinn was semi-conscious when Amy placed her in the chamber, and she looked up at Amy with frightened eyes, and Amy held her hand and promised everything would be okay. Leaf the green dragon was the smallest and youngest of the 3 dragons, and Amy worried he might not have enough energy reserves to complete the healing. But the little dragon surprised her. When Leaf breathed his green light, it was more intense than his brother's, and it filled the chamber with brightness, like sunlight. Through Leaves and Quinn's armor responded eagerly, growing and spreading and sealing. The whole process took only 10 minutes for Quinn. And when Amy pulled her out, the young Sarath woman opened her eyes fully for the first time, and smiled weakly, and whispered, "Thank you," in her own language. Amy checked all 3 sisters and confirmed that their armor was stable, and their biological functions were returning to normal, and their reproductive systems had been saved. And she felt exhaustion hit her like a physical weight. She had been working for almost 3 hours straight without rest, and her hands were shaking, and her vision was blurry. But she had done it, and she had saved them. The 3 dragons flew around the medical bay chirping and clicking happily, and they did loop-de-loops in the air, celebrating their partner's recovery. Amy sat down heavily in a chair and closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she opened them again, she found Nyla sitting up on her medical table, looking at her with wonder. Nyla spoke in accented human language that she must have learned before the attack, and she asked Amy how she had done what should have been impossible. Amy explained about the modified regeneration chamber and the energy, amplification, and using the dragon's natural abilities enhanced by human technology. Nyla shook her head in amazement and said that Sarath medical science had never thought to combine dragon energy with technological amplification, and this human had invented a completely new healing method in just a few hours. Tessa was awake now too, and she touched her regenerated armor with trembling fingers, and tears ran down her face, and she kept saying she could feel it working again. Feel her body. Returning to normal, Quinn sat up slowly, and immediately Leaf flew to her, and she caught the little dragon and held him close, and cried into his scales while he made comforting chirping sounds. The 3 sisters looked at Amy, and there was something in their eyes beyond gratitude, and it was respect and recognition that this human stranger had given them back their futures. Nyla asked Amy why she had risked so much for people she did not know, and Amy thought about how to explain the human concept of helping others simply because it was right. She said that humans believed every life had value and every person deserved a chance at happiness and family and future, and when someone needed help, you helped them regardless of what species they were. Tessa said that not all species thought that way, and many would have left them to die rather than risk themselves or spend resources on strangers. Amy shrugged and said that was why humans were spreading across the galaxy so fast and making alliances everywhere, because people trusted humans to help when help was needed. Quinn asked if all humans were like Amy, and Amy laughed and said no. Humans were individuals, and some were selfish and cruel, but most tried to do the right thing when they could. The ship AI announced they were approaching the medical station, and Amy prepared to transfer the sisters to professional care, but Nyla asked if they could stay on Amy's ship just a little longer. Amy was surprised and asked why, and Nyla explained that they felt safe with Amy, and they wanted to make sure their recovery was complete before they went somewhere unfamiliar. The human colony of New Portland was a small settlement on a frontier world, and it was the perfect place for the 3 sisters to recover away from the busy core systems. And Amy docked her ship at the main port and arranged for supplies. The sisters were much stronger after 2 days of rest and proper nutrition, and their armor had continued regenerating and was now almost completely restored, with only a few small gaps remaining. Amy took them to a quiet medical center run by a doctor named Helen Chen, who specialized in xenobiology, and Helen was fascinated by the Sarath sisters and their crystalline armor. Helen ran thorough scans and confirmed what Amy's instruments had shown, and the sisters' reproductive systems were functioning normally, and there would be no lasting damage from their 5-year ordeal. Quinn cried when Helen told her this, and she hugged Amy tightly and said she had dreamed of having children since she was small, and she thought that dream was lost forever. Amy felt proud that she had been able to give Quinn back her dream, and she realized this was why she had become a rescue pilot, and these moments of helping people made all the dangerous work worthwhile. During the medical examination, Helen discovered something interesting, and she found that the regeneration process had actually strengthened the sisters' armor beyond its original state. The amplified dragon energy, combined with the human technology, had created new crystal structures that were more resilient and efficient than natural armor growth alone. Nyla was amazed and said this meant Amy's technique could be used to help other Serath who had damaged armor, and it could revolutionize their medical practices. Amy offered to share the technical specifications with the Serath medical community, and Nyla accepted gratefully and said the Serath Council would want to meet Amy and honor her properly. But Amy said she did not need honors, and she was just happy the sisters were healthy, and she asked what they planned to do now that they were free. The question made the three sisters look at each other with uncertainty, and Tessa explained that their family estate had been seized by the government after they were declared dead. Their positions at the research station were long gone, and they had no money or resources, and they were essentially starting their lives over from nothing. Quinn added that they needed to find work, but most Serath employers would be hesitant to hire them because they had been missing for 5 years, and there would be questions about what happened. Amy listened to their concerns and made a decision that surprised even herself, and she offered them positions on her crew as research specialists and cultural liaisons. Her ship traveled to many different worlds and stations, and having Serath crew members would open doors that were closed to humans alone. And plus, she genuinely liked the three sisters and enjoyed their company. The sisters were shocked by the offer, and Nyla asked if Amy was serious, and Amy said she never joked about crew positions, and her ship had room for 3 more people, and 3 small dragons. Tessa pointed out that they knew nothing about human ships or human technology, and they might not be useful crew members. Amy laughed and said they could learn, and besides, they had skills that would be valuable, and their knowledge of crystalline materials and energy systems could help with repairs and modifications. Quinn was excited and asked if this meant they could travel with Amy and see the galaxy, and Amy said yes, that was exactly what it meant. The 3 sisters accepted immediately, and the 3 dragons celebrated by flying around the medical center, chirping and doing aerial tricks that made the human nurses laugh. Over the next week, Amy helped the sisters settle into life on her ship, and she showed them how the human systems worked and taught them basic engineering and navigation. The sisters were quick learners, and Nyla especially showed a talent for understanding human technology, and she could look at a system once and figure out how it worked. Tessa was interested in weapons and defense systems, and Amy taught her how to use the ship's defensive lasers and missile systems. Quinn loved the hydroponics bay where Amy grew fresh vegetables, and she spent hours tending the plants and talking to them. And Amy learned that Serath believed plants had spirits that responded to kindness. The dragons adapted quickly to ship life, and they found their favorite spots to sleep and play. And Sky liked to perch on the bridge and watch the stars, while Blaze preferred the engine room where it was warm. Leaf followed Quinn everywhere and would curl up in her lap while she worked, and the little green dragon had a habit of stealing shiny objects and hiding them in a nest he made in the cargo bay. Amy found herself enjoying having a larger crew, and the ship felt less lonely with voices and laughter and the sound of dragon wings filling the corridors. One evening, Amy and the 3 sisters sat in the common area sharing a meal, and Nyla asked Amy about her family and where she came from. Amy explained that she grew up on Earth in a city called San Diego near the ocean, and her parents ran a small restaurant, and she had 2 younger brothers who were both in the military. She said she left home at 18 to join the merchant fleet, and she had been flying cargo and rescue missions for 10 years, and she loved the freedom of space. Tessa asked if Amy ever got homesick, and Amy admitted she did sometimes, and she missed her family and the smell of the ocean and the taste of her mother's cooking. But she said space was her home now, and she could not imagine living on a planet permanently, and the stars called to her in a way she could not explain. Quinn said she understood because Serath felt the same way about their bond with dragons, and it was something beyond words that you felt in your soul. The conversation turned to the smugglers who had locked the sisters in the storage bay and left them to die, and Amy could see anger in their eyes when they talked about it. Nyla said the smugglers were part of a criminal organization called the Red Chain that operated in the outer sectors, and they specialized in stealing rare materials and selling them on black markets. The Red Chain had attacked the research station specifically to steal Serath crystals, which were incredibly valuable, and they killed or captured everyone who got in their way. Tessa said the sisters had fought back using their dragons and their combat training, but there had been too many smugglers, and eventually they were overwhelmed and locked away. Amy asked if the sisters wanted to report what happened to the authorities and bring the Red Chain to justice. Nyla shook her head sadly and said the Red Chain was too powerful and too well connected, and trying to fight them would only put more innocent people in danger. Besides, after 5 years, the evidence would be gone, and the smugglers would have moved on, and there would be no way to prove what happened. Amy understood, but she filed the information away in her memory, and she had a feeling this was not the last time she would hear about the Red Chain. The next day, Amy received a message from the Serath Council requesting a meeting, and Nyla said this was a great honor, and the council rarely met with non-Serath individuals. Amy agreed to the meeting out of curiosity, and she wanted to see the Serath homeworld and learn more about their culture. The journey to the Serath homeworld took 4 days, and during that time, Amy continued training the sisters in ship operations, and they proved to be excellent students. By the time they arrived at the Serath system, all 3 sisters could handle basic navigation and emergency procedures, and Amy felt confident leaving them in charge of the ship when needed. The Serath homeworld was called Crystallis, and it was a beautiful planet covered in forests of crystal trees that grew from mineral-rich soil and reflected sunlight in rainbow patterns. The main city was built into the side of a massive crystal mountain, and buildings seemed to grow organically from the rock, creating architecture that was both natural and artificial. Amy landed her ship at the main spaceport and was greeted by a delegation of Serath officials who wore elaborate armor decorated with precious gems. The officials welcomed the sisters home and expressed joy that they were alive and safe, and they apologized that the government had seized their family property. Nyla said she understood it was just procedure and asked if the property could be returned now that they were back. The officials looked uncomfortable and explained that the property had been sold to pay debts and it would be difficult to reverse the transaction. Amy saw the hurt in the sisters' eyes, but they accepted the news with dignity and said they would rebuild their lives from the beginning. The delegation escorted them to the council chambers, which were inside the crystal mountain in a hall that glowed with natural light filtered through colored crystal. The Serath Council consisted of 7 elders who were the wisest and most respected members of their species, and they sat in a semicircle on thrones made of living crystal. The head counselor was named Aldrich, and he had armor that looked like it was made from diamonds, and his dragon was ancient and large with scales that shimmered like opals. Aldrich welcomed Amy formally and thanked her for saving the 3 sisters and restoring their futures, and he said the Serath people were in her debt. Amy said she did not want a debt, and she was happy to have helped, and she considered the sisters her friends now. Aldrich smiled and said that humans were remarkable in their casual generosity, and he had heard stories about human rescuers, but meeting one in person was enlightening. Asked Amy to explain how she had developed the armor regeneration technique, and Amy described the modified regeneration chamber and the energy amplification process. 6 months passed after the council meeting, and Amy's ship, the Wandering Star, traveled across multiple sectors with her new crew of 3 Serath sisters and their dragon companions. The sisters had become excellent crew members, and they each found their strengths and contributed in ways that made the ship run better than it ever had when Amy worked. Alone, Nyla became the chief engineer, and she had an amazing ability to understand and improve human systems, and she made modifications that increased engine efficiency by 20%. Tessa handled ship security and weapons, and she trained Amy in Serath combat techniques, and together they made the ship much safer when traveling through dangerous regions. Quinn managed the hydroponics bay and also served as the crew's medic because Serath had extensive knowledge of biology and healing, and her gentle nature made her perfect for the role. The 3 dragons were not just pets but active members of the crew, and Sky could sense electromagnetic fields which helped detect hidden ships or stations. Blaze could generate enough heat to weld metal or cut through obstacles, and he had saved them twice when repairs needed to be done outside the ship in emergency situations. Leaf had the sharpest eyes of the three dragons, and he could spot tiny details at great distances, which made him an excellent scout when approaching unknown locations. Amy found herself happier than she had been in years, and having a real crew that felt like family made the long journeys through space much more enjoyable. They had taken contracts that brought them to dozens of worlds, and they delivered medical supplies to colonies and transported researchers to dig sites, and even helped evacuate a station. Before a solar flare hit, the Seraph armor band on Amy's arm had proven useful multiple times, and once it had detected toxic gas before her suit sensors did, and another time it had helped heal a broken rib in half the normal time. But their peaceful routine was about to be disrupted because the past has a way of catching up with people who try to run from it. They were delivering mining equipment to a remote asteroid station when Amy noticed something wrong, and there were ships in the area that were not supposed to be there. Her sensors showed 5 vessels hiding behind the asteroid using stealth technology, and they had weapon signatures that matched known pirate configurations. Amy immediately went to alert status and called the sisters to the bridge, and when Nyla saw the sensor data, her face went pale. She said those ships belonged to the Red Chain and the same criminal organization that had attacked the research station 5 years ago and left the sisters to die. Tessa checked the weapon signatures more carefully and confirmed it, and she said the lead ship was called the Crimson Fang, and it was commanded by a brutal captain named Victor Kane Quinn, looked frightened and asked what they should do, and Amy said they should leave immediately before the Red Chain noticed them. But it was too late because one of the pirate ships broke from formation and moved to intercept, and a harsh voice came over the communication channel, demanding they stop their engines. Amy tried to play innocent, and she said she was just a cargo hauler making a delivery, and she had nothing valuable on board. Victor Kane's voice came through the speakers, and he said he would decide what was valuable, and ordered Amy to prepare for boarding, or be destroyed. The sisters recognized Kane's voice immediately, and old fear showed on their faces, but also anger, because this was the man who had imprisoned them and left them to die. Amy made a quick decision, and she fired up the engines to maximum power and dove toward the asteroid field, hoping to lose the pirates in the maze of floating rocks. The Crimson Fang pursued along with 2 other ships, and they were faster than the Wandering Star, and they opened fire with laser cannons. Amy dodged and weaved through the asteroids while Tessa returned fire from their defensive weapons, and several shots hit the pursuing ships, but their shields absorbed the damage. Nyla worked frantically to divert more power to the engines and shields, and she managed to squeeze out another 5% speed, but it was not enough. Quinn strapped into her station and monitored the ship systems while the 3 dragons flew around the bridge, agitated by the danger their bonded partners were facing. Me realized they could not outrun the pirates, and they could not outfight them, and they needed a different strategy. She spotted a large asteroid ahead with deep crevices and caves, and she had a crazy idea that might work. She dove toward the asteroid at full speed, and the pirates followed, thinking they had her trapped. But at the last second, Amy flipped the ship and fired reverse thrusters. The Wandering Star slowed dramatically and slipped into a narrow canyon on the asteroid surface while the pirate ships overshot and had to loop back around. Amy flew through the canyon, barely fitting between the rock walls, and she could see side passages branching off in multiple directions. She took a sharp turn into one of the side passages and cut her engines to minimal power and activated stealth mode, which would mask their heat signature. The pirates entered the canyon, but they did not know which passage Amy had taken, and they split up to search. Amy held her breath as one pirate ship flew past their hiding spot just meters away, and the pirates scanned the area, but the stealth system worked, and they did not detect the Wandering Star. After tense minutes, the pirates moved on to search other passages, and Amy slowly backed the ship out of hiding and prepared to make a run for it. But as they emerged from the canyon, Victor Kane was waiting, and his ship, the Crimson Fang, blocked their path with weapons charged and ready to fire. Kane's voice came over the speakers again, and this time he sounded amused, and he said that was a clever trick, but the game was over. He ordered Amy to surrender and prepare to be boarded, and he promised to make it quick and painless if they cooperated. Amy looked at the sisters and saw determination in their eyes, especially Nyla, who had been thinking about revenge for 5 years. Nyla said they should not surrender and they should fight even if the odds were bad, because living on your knees was worse than dying on your feet. Tessa agreed, and She started charging the weapons for a final battle. But Amy had another idea, and she asked Nyla if the modifications she made to the engines would allow for a dangerous maneuver, called an emergency jump. Nyla said yes. But emergency jumps were incredibly risky, because you did not have time to calculate a safe destination, and you could end up inside a star or a planet. Amy said it was better than being captured by the red chain, and she started the jump sequence. Kane saw what they were doing and fired all weapons, but the wandering star's shields held just long enough and the ship vanished in a flash of light. The emergency jump lasted 3 seconds and felt like falling through ice water, and then they emerged in normal space light years from the asteroid field. Amy checked their location and breathed a sigh of relief, because they were in empty space far from any stars or planets, and the jump had worked. The sisters hugged each other, celebrating their escape, and the dragons flew victory loops around the bridge. But Nyla pointed out that the red chain now knew the sisters were alive and Victor Kane would be looking for them, and they would never be completely safe. Tessa said they could not run forever, and eventually they would have to face the red chain and stop them permanently. Amy agreed, but said they needed help, and they could not take on a criminal organization alone. She had an idea, though, and she knew some people in human military intelligence who owed her favors, and maybe they would be interested in taking down the red chain over the next week. Amy made discreet contacts and gathered information, and she learned that human authorities had been trying to catch the red chain for years, but could never get solid evidence. The sisters' testimony about what happened at the research station could provide that evidence, but they would need more proof and witnesses to make charges stick. Amy proposed a plan, and they would gather evidence against the red chain and build a case that human and Serath authorities could not ignore. It would be dangerous and would require them to get close to red chain operations. But Amy believed it was possible. The sisters agreed immediately because they wanted justice, not just for themselves, but for all the other victims the red chain had hurt over the years. They spent 2 months carefully investigating red chain activities, and they tracked smuggling routes and identified key members and gathered data on illegal transactions. Nyla used her technical skills to hack into red chain communication networks and intercept messages that revealed their operations. Tessa used her combat training to scout red chain facilities from a distance and map their security systems. Quinn interviewed refugees and survivors who had been hurt by the red chain and collected their testimonies. Amy coordinated everything and compiled the evidence into a comprehensive report that documented years of crimes. Finally, they had enough, and Amy delivered the report to a human admiral named Patricia Wells, who commanded an anti-piracy task force. Admiral Wells reviewed the evidence and was impressed by how thorough it was, and she agreed to coordinate a joint operation with Serath authorities to take down the red chain. The operation was planned for 3 weeks later, and it would involve simultaneous raids on multiple red chain facilities across 5 star systems. Amy and her crew were invited to participate as civilian advisors, and the sisters jumped at the chance to see justice finally served. The night before the operation, the 4 women sat together in the common area and talked about how far. The day of the operation arrived, and Amy felt nervous energy running through her body as she prepared the wandering star for departure. And the sisters were equally tense but also excited to finally get justice Admiral Wells had assigned them to. The assault team targeting the red chain's main base, which was hidden inside a hollowed-out moon in the Terminus sector, and it was where Victor Kane operated from. The assault force consisted of 20 military ships, including fighters and cruisers, and they gathered at a staging point just outside the sector. And Admiral Wells gave a final briefing. She explained that intelligence showed approximately 200 red chain members at the base, including Kane himself, and they were heavily armed. But the surprise attack should give the military forces a significant advantage. The plan was to jump in simultaneously from multiple directions and disable the base's weapons before they could respond, and then Marines would board and capture everyone. Inside, Amy and her crew would stay back and provide intelligence support since they were civilians. But the sisters had insisted on being part of the boarding team. Admiral Wells initially refused, but Nyla argued that they knew the red chain's tactics and ship layouts better than anyone, and they could help prevent casualties. Tessa added that they had earned the right to face their attackers, and Quinn said quietly that seeing Kane captured would help them heal from the trauma. Finally, the Admiral, agreed but assigned them a protective detail of 6 Marines who would keep them safe during the operation. The fleet jumped together and emerged around the moon in perfect formation, and immediately the military ships opened fire on the base's defensive weapons. The Red Chain was caught completely by surprise, and their shields came up too slowly, and several weapon platforms were destroyed before they could return. Fire Amy watched from her position in the fleet's command ship as the battle unfolded, and it was over in less than 10 minutes with the base defenseless and surrounded. The boarding teams launched in armored shuttles, and the sisters went with the third wave along with their Marine escorts and the 3 dragons who refused to be left behind. The shuttle docked with an airlock on the base's eastern section, and the Marines breached the door and moved in with weapons ready. Inside the base was a maze of corridors and rooms, carved from the moon's rock, and the air smelled like oil and sweat and fear. The Red Chain members tried to resist, but they were outnumbered and outgunned, and most surrendered quickly when they realized the fight was hopeless. The sisters moved through the base with the Marines, and Nyla's knowledge of typical Red Chain layouts helped them navigate efficiently toward the command center, where Kane would be. They encountered a group of Red Chain fighters who refused to surrender, and a brief firefight erupted, and Tessa used her combat training to flank them, while the Marines provided covering fire. One of the criminals fired at Quinn, but Sky the Blue Dragon dove and breathed a stunning blast of light that temporarily blinded the shooter and gave the Marines time to capture him. The command center was heavily fortified with blast doors and automated defenses, and the Marines set up breaching charges while Nyla worked to hack the security system. She managed to override the automated defenses and shut them down just as the Marines blew the doors and they rushed inside. Victor Kane stood in the center of the command center surrounded by his top lieutenants, and he held a detonator in his hand, threatening to blow up the entire base. Admiral Wells's voice came through the communication system ordering Kane to surrender and promising him a fair trial if he cooperated. Kane laughed bitterly and said he would never spend his life in a prison cell, and he would rather die taking everyone with him. But then Nyla stepped forward and removed her helmet so Kane could see her face, and recognition flashed in his eyes, followed by shock. He said it was impossible because she should be dead along with her sisters, and they had been locked in that storage bay for 5 years. Nyla said they survived because of their armor and their dragons, and because a human found them and saved them. She said Kane's cruelty had failed, and instead of dying they had grown stronger, and now they were here to see justice. Tessa and Quinn stepped forward too, and removed their helmets, and Kane's face went pale as he realized all 3 sisters had survived. Quinn spoke quietly and said that Kane had taken 5 years of their lives and tried to take their futures, but he had failed, and they were still here, still alive, still able to have families. She said his actions had consequences, and today those consequences had finally caught up with him. Kane's hand trembled on the detonator, and for a moment Amy thought he would actually trigger it. But then Blaze the Red Dragon flew at Kane's face, breathing a stream of hot air, and the shock made Kane drop the detonator. The Marines immediately tackled him and secured him in restraints, and the operation was over and Kane was captured. The sisters stood together watching as their tormentor was led away, and tears streamed down their faces. But these were tears of relief and closure. The Red Chain base was completely secured, and over 150 criminals were arrested, including all of Kane's top lieutenants. Evidence found in the base's computers documented years of crimes and would lead to dozens more arrests across the galaxy. Admiral Wells personally thanked Amy and the sisters for their help, and said that without their evidence and testimony the operation would not have been possible. The human and Serath governments both issued statements praising the joint operation and calling it a model for future cooperation between species. Amy and her crew returned to the Wandering Star exhausted but satisfied, and as they left the Terminus sector, they felt like a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Over the next months, the legal proceedings against the Red Chain members moved forward, and Kane and his lieutenants received long prison sentences. The sisters testified at the trials, and their courage in facing their attackers inspired many other victims to come forward with their own stories. The Sarath Council honored the sisters with medals of valor and restored their family property and offered them positions in the government. But the sisters declined the government positions and said they preferred their life aboard the Wandering Star with Amy and their adventures across the galaxy. Amy was touched by their loyalty and said they would always have a home on her ship for as long as they wanted. The story of the human captain who saved 3 Sarath sisters spread across the galaxy and became a legend, told in both human and Sarath cultures. Other species heard about it too, and Amy started receiving offers to transport or rescue people from dozens of different civilizations. Her ship became known as a place where anyone in trouble could find help, regardless of species or ability to pay. 1 year after the rescue, Nyla announced that she had met someone special during a stop at a trading station, and his name was Dane, and he was a Sarath merchant. They had bonded quickly, and Nyla was in love, and she wanted to start a family. Amy was thrilled for her friend and helped plan a beautiful ceremony where Nyla and Dane were married, according to Sarath traditions. 6 months later, Nyla announced she was pregnant, and the whole crew celebrated because this was the future they had fought so hard to preserve. Tessa met her partner soon after, and a human pilot named Carlos who shared her love of adventure, and they bonded over their mutual respect for combat skills. Quinn took longer to find her match, but eventually met a Sarath botanist named Fen who shared her gentle nature and love of growing things. Amy watched her 3 sisters build the families they had dreamed of and felt proud beyond measure. She became the favorite aunt to all their children, and the kids loved when Aunt Amy would tell them stories about adventures in space. The 3 dragons Skyblaze and Leaf became protective guardians of the children, and the youngsters would ride on the dragons' backs and play in the ship's corridors. Amy never married, but she never felt alone because she had her crew and her extended family, and the knowledge that she had made a real difference. Years passed, and the wandering star continued traveling the galaxy, and Amy's crew expanded to include the sisters' children, and eventually, their grandchildren. The ship became a symbol of hope and cooperation between species and a reminder that one person's choice to help could change countless lives. Amy grew older but never lost her passion for helping others, and even in her final years she was still piloting rescue missions. When she finally died peacefully in her sleep at age 93, the entire galaxy mourned, and representatives from 50 different species attended her funeral. The Sarath Council declared a day of remembrance in her honor, and the human government named a new class of rescue ships after her. Nyla, Tessa, and Quinn, who had also grown old, surrounded by children and grandchildren, spoke at Amy's funeral about how one human woman had saved them and changed everything. They said Amy had taught them that family was not just about blood, but about choosing to stand together through hardship. That courage meant doing the right thing even when it was hard, and that every life had value worth fighting. For the 3 sisters lived another decade after Amy's death, and when they finally passed, they were buried on Chrysalis, next to a memorial garden. The garden had a statue of Amy surrounded by 3 Sarath sisters and 3 dragons, and beneath it was an inscription.